Not a day passes without a prominent Israeli politician or intellectual making an outrageous statement against Palestinians. Many of these statements tend to garner little attention or evoke rightly deserved outrage. Just recently, Israel's Minister of Agriculture, Uri Ariel, called for more death and injuries on Palestinians in Gaza. "What is this special weapon we have that we fire and see pillars of smoke and fire, but nobody gets hurt? It is time for there to be injuries and deaths as well," he said. Ariel's calling for the killing of more Palestinians came on the heels of other repugnant statements concerning a 16-year-old teenager girl, Ahed Tamimi. Ahed was arrested in a violent Israeli army raid at her home in the West Bank village of Nabi Saleh. A video recording showed her slapping an Israeli soldier a day after the Israeli army shot her cousin in the head, placing him in a coma. Israeli Education Minister, Naftali Bennett, known for his extremist political views, demanded that Ahed and other Palestinian girls should spend the rest of their days in prison. A prominent Israeli journalist, Ben Caspit, sought yet more punishment. He suggested that Ahed and girls like her should be raped in jail. "In the case of the girls, we should exact a price at some other opportunity, in the dark, without witnesses and cameras," he wrote in Hebrew. This violent and revolting mindset, however, is not new. It is an extension of an old, entrenched belief system that is predicated on a long history of violence. Undeniably, the views of Ariel, Bennett and Caspit are not angry statements uttered in a moment of rage. They are all reflections of real policies that have been carried out for over 70 years. Indeed, killing, raping and imprisoning for life are features that have accompanied the state of Israel since the very beginning. Read more. As a Palestinian on the stage, one feel infighting, resisting this violent legacy continues to define Israel to this day, through the use of what Israeli historian Ilan Pappé describes as incremental genocide. Throughout this long legacy, little has changed except for names and titles. The Zionist militias that orchestrated the genocide of the Palestinians prior to the establishment of Israel in 1948 merged together to form the Israeli army, and the leaders of these groups became Israel's leaders. Israel's violent birth in 1947-48 was the culmination of the violent discourse that preceded it for many years. It was the time when Zionist teachings of prior years were put into practice, and the outcome was simply horrifying. The tactic of isolating and attacking a certain village or town and executing its population in a horrible, indiscriminate massacre was a strategy employed, time and again, by Zionist bands to compel the population of surrounding villages and towns to flee, Ahmed al-Hajj told me when I asked him to reflect on Israel's past and present. Al-Hajj is a Palestinian historian and an expert on the Nakba, the catastrophe that had befallen Palestinians in 1948. The 85-year-old intellectual's proficiency in the subject began 70 years ago, when, as a 15-year-old, he witnessed the massacre of Beit Daras at the hands of Jewish Haganah militia. The destruction of the southern Palestinian village and the killing of dozens of its inhabitants resulted in the depopulation of many adjacent villages, including Al-Sawafir, Al-Hajj home village. The notorious Deir Yassin massacre was the first example of such wanton killing, a model that was duplicated in other parts of Palestine, Al-Hajj said. The ethnic cleansing of Palestine at the time was orchestrated by several Zionist militias. The mainstream Jewish militia was the Haganah, which belonged to the Jewish Agency. Read more. Israel army killed 15 Palestinian children in 2017. The latter functioned as a semi-government, under the auspices of the British Mandate government, while the Haganah served as its army. However, other breakaway groups also operated according to their own agenda. Two leading bands amongst them were the Irgun National Military Organization and Lehi, also known as the Stern Gang. These groups carried out numerous terrorist attacks, including bus bombings and targeted assassinations. Russian-born Menahem Begin was the leader of the Irgun, which, along with the Stern Gang and other Jewish militants, massacred hundreds of civilians in Deir Yassin. Tell the soldiers, you have made history in Israel with your attack and your conquest. Continue this until victory. As in Deir Yassin, so everywhere, we will attack and smite the enemy. God, thou hast chosen us for conquest, Begin wrote at the time. He described the massacre as a splendid act of conquest. The intrinsic link between words and actions remain unchanged. Nearly 30 years later, a once-wanted terrorist, Begin became Prime Minister of Israel. He accelerated land theft of the newly occupied West Bank and East Jerusalem, launched a war on Lebanon, annexed occupied Jerusalem to Israel, and carried out the massacre of Sabra and Shatila in 1982. Some of the other terrorists-turned-politicians and top army brass include Begin, Moshe Dayan, Yitzhak Rabin, Ariel Sharon, Raphael Eitan, and Yitzhak Shamir. Each one of these leaders has a record dotted with violence. Shamir served as the Prime Minister of Israel from 1986 to 1992. In 1941, Shamir was imprisoned by the British for his role in the Stern Gang. Later, as Prime Minister, he ordered a violent crackdown against a mostly non-violent Palestinian uprising in 1987, purposely breaking the limbs of kids accused of throwing rocks at Israeli soldiers. So, when government ministers like Ariel and Bennett call for wanton violence against Palestinians, they are simply carrying on with the bloody legacy that has defined every single Israeli leader in the past. It is the violent mindset that continues to control the Israeli government and its relationship with Palestinians, in fact, with all of its neighbors.